What I'm about to share with you is extremely difficult for me, but I'm sharing it as a forewarning to others, especially those in my community. And it needs to be told because, in spite of what I'm feeling, this has caused me or has been a source of so much pain, stress, anxiety, and depression, sadness, just to name a few, and anger. It's caused me so much anger. And I don't want anybody else to go through what I and my family are going through at this time. I have to start this off and say that I loved my mother. I loved her like no other. And I'm sure many of you loved your mother or love your mother. In April of this year, I lost my mother, rather unexpectedly. And it's been especially difficult for me, given what I've learned since her passing. Now, my mother passed as a result of 3 strokes she had, and she had them successively, just back to back. And after the first stroke, she was fine. But the last 2 rendered her completely helpless, to the point where she couldn't breathe on her own. She couldn't turn on her own. She was totally and completely at the mercy of others. She couldn't even swallow on her own. And there's so many lessons here that I want to share with you all. Number one, she did not have a healthcare power of attorney. There was no health directive. At the time, there was no power of attorney. What is very important also to the story and events that I am about to share with you is now not even 9 months prior to losing my mother, I also lost my father. And I lost my father to Alzheimer's. This is important to know because it plays into everything that happened. And we did have all that set up for for my father just 9 months before, but not for my mother. That was a mistake. Now, during this period that she was rendered helpless, the doctor's prognosis at the time was that there was never going to be any meaningful recovery. And at the time, my siblings and I had a disagreement, or some of my siblings and I had a disagreement as to what my mother's wishes would have been in that situation, whether it be a living will or a DNR, do not resuscitate. And having gone through this with my mother and knowing what her wishes were for the final end stages of my father, I knew that my mom would not want to have lived like that. But everyone didn't agree. And because everyone did not agree, I knew that I needed to get a court order for guardianship to make decisions that I felt were in her best interests, and to get conservatorship so I could tackle her finance and take care of her business. And the court during those 2 weeks had set a hearing out for 2 weeks, and they appointed her attorney to also look out for her best interests to see if there was an emergency guardianship and conservatorship was appropriate. But during those 2 weeks, what I discovered has tested my faith, has infuriated me, has caused me so much anxiety and stress that you could not believe. And to this day, it compounds the sense of loss and grief. And that anger still has not gone away. Now, what I discovered should never have happened. And I do not want anybody else's mother or grandmother or grandparent to go through this at all and feel what I've been feeling. And so much anger and hurt. What I learned is that my 78-year-old mother was a victim of elder financial abuse and exploitation. My mother was essentially conned out of over $100,000. $100,000 by persons that she thought she could trust or had a reason to trust. And since her death, and because of their actions, my siblings and I could very well end up losing my mother's home. And this weighs, or has weighed very heavily on me. Now, I don't want this to happen. As I said, I don't want this to happen to anybody else. And I'm telling you all this because I want to impart what I've learned and detail you the journey that I've been on to hold those persons accountable and the roadblocks that I've been up against, partially because my mother is now deceased and she's not here to tell her story. Now, I've changed names of the parties involved as I tell this story, and for the purposes of my mother's story, I will call her Lucilia Banks, because that is how these persons treated her, like their bank. This is, she prayed over my mom.